My name is Jan Krasni, and I work at an interesting institution, which I mean, in the course of my lecture, you will understand what I refer to when I talk about censoring. I work at the Institute for Research on Anti-Semitism, and there we deal with lots of material that may be maybe a little bit problematic. But let's jump into my talk. So let's start with some random questions. What would you say, is historical truth important?
Yes, Alexander from Germany. I think, yes, it is important to have untempered access, at least for researchers, to gain an understanding of the context of its original and to develop a new interpretation. Because if it's tempered, then you can't do original research.
Okay, so I will sum it up. Alexander thinks it is important to have historical truth, and it is important to have access to it. Very good. Then let's go to the next questions. What do you think, guys? What would happen if we would open all the archives? I believe this is one of the favorite questions of all conspiracy theorists. Alexander has the.
Yeah, it's easy to foresee that if you, for example, provide a PURL, a persistent URL for, let's say, a in Germany forbidden Nazi symbol, then it will be embedded in other hate speech sites.
We are approaching the problem of my talk. Okay, and then of course I have to. I couldn't not ask this question because it's all over the media. You don't have to answer it. I'm pretty sure that most of us here are against all the values that stand behind behind racism or anti-Semitism, Nazi ideology. But my next question is a little bit closer to that. So, do you think if we say we should open the archives, or if we should say historical truth is important, would it be okay that everyone would have access to Mein Kampf, to uncommented edition, or to all the scientific literature? Just think about eugenics that was in place in Sweden until recently. Well, not until a few years ago, but until a few decades ago. If this kind of scientific literature would be accessible to everyone, and do you think it would make sense, or do you think it would make sense that various arguments and a lot of literature that is inside these archives and that questions the existence of atrocities in the Second World War or other atrocities would be publicly accessible in the online libraries, e-libraries, right? Now, this is part where your answer, which I agree with, that archives should be open and should be completely accessible, this is where it gets a little bit tricky. Yeah, I'm not sure that this makes sense, qualified researchers, because you know how easy it is to access any archive and to say I am a qualified researcher, and then you're in there, and you can get almost anything from any archive. So yeah, I believe it is a little bit more tricky than splitting people into qualified and unqualified. But
hiding those things, it's also like hiding your own history, in a way, like hiding the
let's get
white
into it.
colonial.
Maybe my talk will answer to this question. Because I mean, yeah. Let's come to it. If I don't answer your question, then please don't forget. So most of the archives are partially publicly accessible. Yet they are storing dark secrets from the past. And the most important thing, especially when it comes to the archive of the organization of the institute where I work, they are hiding this problematic material. Problematic material that can be used, right? That can be instrumentalized, especially today when we have so much hate speech and hate discourses and promotion of hate ideology. I've been working in this field for, well, at least 6 years of hate discourses and hate ideology. So I know what I'm talking about. It really can be problematic, especially when people take pieces of facts from the past and then use it in order to promote their position. Right. So let's skip to another topic, and in a second we will combine both topics together. If you were trying to get a job in Germany in the academic field, you saw that there are many positions in the field of creation or promotion or working on research data infrastructures. And there are lots of grants. Well, Björn was mentioning it today by many research foundations, and organizations that support research for so-called innovative and explorative approaches for e-research infrastructures. Now, the interesting thing is that it is not the case only in Germany. It is case in, well, basically all of EU, right? What people there are working on, and what Björn mentioned today, people are working on finding technical, educational, juridical, and organizational solutions for research data management and for research data infrastructures, right? Now, when we talk about the research infrastructure, what is it, right? So it is, as I wrote here, it is important for knowledge exchange all over on the international level, the level of EU, and it is anchored, it is very deeply rooted in the idea of open science. And open science means that, well, open science is super important for all of us for this event, because that free access to research data is what makes possible citizen science, right? It is what makes possible not to do many repeats of the same experiment, right? So it is super important. And we already mentioned several times fair management, that all the data that belong to these, that are stored in these infrastructures, are findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And interoperable, it's especially important because of this idea. It should be accessible for all the people within Europe. Research infrastructure, and this is something that I find especially important, is about a comprehensive process of enveloping, the digital enveloping of science, right? And now when we talk about archives, it means creation of all the infrastructure that makes possible a digital object to be findable as such. Let me expand a little bit on RDIs, research data infrastructure, right? So they are the preparatory step for the digitalization as such. Because if you don't have infrastructure, you will never be able to get funding for digitalization. And if you don't digitalize objects from your libraries, from your research, whatever you're doing, there will be no so-called digital turn. There will be no digital revolution. That is something that Björn mentioned today as well. It has to be bottom-up process, right? because any digitalization process and creation of this infrastructure has to be something that people from the field, from the specific scientific field are doing. They have to start with it, right? So this infrastructure, it cannot be unified for all the world. It has to fit interests of the research. And then these institutions are those that ensure supranational cooperation or cooperation between countries. As you see, NFTI that we mentioned so many times today is only part of this larger project of European Open Science Cloud, right? And this cloud, as you mentioned in this meme today, it's just someone else's computer, right? So it's basically data centers all over the Europe. I believe Serbia also belonged and had several projects that belong to this EOSC framework. Right. Coming back to Germany, I just want to give you an example that Bjorn already mentioned today. In all the scientific, on all the scientific fields, you have consortia, or basically associations of various universities in various disciplines, where people try to digitalize their data to make them accessible for all the people within the community. For me, or for my project, I have at least 3 or even 4 consortia that are relevant for my research or for my institute, right? So one institute can fit to several consortia. Now let's come to my problem, right, or to my study, to my project, and to the idea how it is ethical to censor stuff, or how could be ethical to censor stuff. Let's put it like that. As I already mentioned, I work at the Center for Research on Anti-Semitism, and we have the largest library and archive of anti-Semitic material. So not only testimonies of the horrors of anti-Semitism, but also propaganda from various moments of history, right? From last 300 years, more or less, right? Then we also have a very I wanted to say nice, a very large archive of so-called anti-Semitic, of visual anti-Semitism, that is work of arts that promote anti-Semitism, and it's called Alava. If you want to Google it, you can, Alava project, and you can find something. And thanks to our researchers, we have constant influx of contemporary material where we come to research data. Basically, we have people who are collecting propaganda or pieces or digital objects connected to anti-Semitism. Right? Also, we have former researchers. Bjorn mentioned that today. He said, so dark data is what you have after a researcher dies, somewhere in a left drawer, a few USB sticks, right? So we have researchers who were working before USB sticks, and they gave us containers of documents and papers that we all have stored in our archive. We have also super funny things like radical right party programs. Right? So before AfD there was NPD. Before NPD there were some other movements, and we have all their manifestos and stuff like that. We have books and journals, fanzines, stuff like that. For historical pieces of anti-Semitism, we have. While I was digging in the archive, I stumbled upon a journal for questions of society. That's the translation of this journal from the 19th century. That was basically explaining how it makes sense to create a ghetto. So it was from 19th century. So it is. We have a variety of material, right? Now, if you want to create a digital archive, if you want to have it digitalized, the logical question is, well, you work at a university, every university has its own archive. Why don't you put your stuff in the university archive? Right? Well, no, because it's a special kind of archive. It's so-called toxic room. By not being able to put it in the university archive, you can't use the university infrastructure for that. It's not very likely that you will have an archivist that will spend his lifetime working on our archive, and because of its specifics, it's not possible to give this archive to someone else to curate it and to prepare it. Right? Many institutions have similar problems. So just for you not to think it is a problem of our institution, any ethnographic museum in Germany, in Belgium, in France will have similar problem. They will have loads and loads of literature explaining how this or that nation is better than the slaves in Africa, explaining basically racial theory, giving arguments. And many of the institutions, and that is also part of research that we prepared before starting with this project proposal. Many of the institutions decline digitalizing such literature and decline putting it online when they stumble upon it. So, in a way, you have some kind of structural whitewashing your past, because no one wants to put it online. No one wants to say this is also part of our history. So what do you need to do? Well, you need to make a system that obviously will help store digital objects, make possible semi-automatic annotation of all these digital objects, of all these magazines, works of art, whatever we have there, right? Generate archival records, basically, or so-called Findbücher, so-called finding aids, where you can see what is in specific documents. Because we are in a digital age that would make innovative research approach possible. And finally, we come to censoring, right? Provide and or restrict access to this material. And then what we also have to do is to formulate ethical guidelines, because we don't have any. This is not something that people were working on until now. There is exactly one scientific article that deals with this problem so far, right? And when I talk about ethical guidelines, what I say is basically we need to find the middle path between Holocaust remembrance and anti-Semitism research and sharing hateful content, right? So on the one hand side, you should not whitewash your history, but on the other hand, you should not give arguments with the stamp of the true historical evidence that this is the right thing to do. Then you should meet the open science demands, definitely, because that is one of the greatest human achievements to make knowledge accessible, right? But also you should abide the law that prohibits dissemination of hateful material. Now, when it comes training algorithms on this hateful material, you should try somehow to stop reproducing hateful content, but also you should stop omitting historical facts and data. Then one of the problems that I stumbled upon when I talked with my friends from IT, they said, well, you shouldn't, and that was something very important for them, and maybe it is worth mentioning it. If a person will work with these materials, they said, well, you shouldn't put such pressure on anyone. No one should actually submerge in all this hateful content. So that is also one of the ethical problems. So what we need to do, and these are functional things, right, that correspond with the ethical problems, is making these diverse historical and contemporary material searchable. That is the most important thing. In order to do that, you have to OCR it. HTR. HTR is handwriting text recognition, because there is a lot of historical material that is written by hand. Or, for example, I will give you an interesting example. We have memoirs of an SS officer, right? Or not his memoirs, but some of his writings that when he was preparing to give a talk. And I mean, we can read it, but it is not so easy to read. Right? If we would scan like thousands of such manuscripts, then it would we would really have to run HTR and not have someone who would. Right. Then other problem that we would have is omitting reproduction of hateful content, right? And that would depend on the status of inquiry, depending on what people want to find in that archive, right? And what kind of result for their query they would get. Right. So would then these existing principles that are basically ethical, right? They are value based in the idea of open science. In how far would they be applicable to our archive of hate, of historical hate, and other archives? Now, for example, let's imagine that we have solved all the problems, right? That we have a solution for that. We have an ethical solution for that. How would we convince others of applying the same ethical solutions and abiding them? So in order to do that, we believe it would be important to create some kind of a living lab, right? A place like this here, where people from various disciplines would come together. So people who are building research infrastructures, people who are doing research, people from the civil society organizations, and who would make some solutions for all the ethical problems that I already mentioned. Right. So Luciano Floridi is one of the leading ethicists of the digital and promoters of so-called digital governance. So what he says is not only there are like more or less 4 steps in finding these solutions. So it is not enough to critically question things and then to make fuss about it, right? Signaling the problems, but it is important to engage with the stakeholders, basically, with all these people, right? And then to design and implement shareable and stable solutions. So in other words, building an infrastructure with this thought, with this ethical idea, would be probably the best way to deal with it, right? So one more time, I believe this is the last thing for you to imagine how dangerous such a project would be. You need to combine all these systemic solutions, right? You need to use transcription models. You need to use multimodal learning models in order to achieve full text search. So what it means is that there is a whole jungle of large language models that would be trained on this hateful material from, in our case, from three centuries. So you can imagine how problematic, even on this level, would it be to create an infrastructure and to put all the digital objects into it. So basically, that's all.